February 20th, 1945. Somewhere east of the Ruhr River, Germany. Staff Sergeant Robert Early crouched beside his Sherman tank, watching ordnance technicians work in the cold morning air. They had lifted the turret from his M4A3E2 jumbo and were fitting something inside that looked too large for the space available. The 76mm gun barrel gleamed in the weak winter sunlight, nearly a foot longer than the 75 it was replacing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Around him, similar conversions were taking place across the 3rd Armoured Division's maintenance area. Crews stood in small groups, smoking and talking in low voices about what this change might mean. For months, they had relied on the jumbo's extraordinary armour to keep them alive against German 88mm guns and Panzerfaust teams. The thick steel had saved countless lives, but the original 75mm gun, excellent for supporting infantry, couldn't penetrate a Panther's frontal armour even at point-blank range. Now, American ordnance was promising them both advantages in a single tank: 4 inches of frontal armour that could withstand German anti-tank fire, combined with a gun that could finally kill Panthers at combat ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. If it worked, if the modification didn't compromise the armour's integrity, if the heavier gun didn't overstress the already burdened suspension, if German tank crews didn't adapt their tactics faster than American crews could exploit their new advantage. The psychological burden of commanding a jumbo had taught Early to think in terms of survival first and victory second. Every engagement meant drawing concentrated enemy fire because German gunners had learned to recognize and prioritize the long-barreled Shermans. The original 75mm jumbos had offered protection without adequate striking power. The new 76mm conversion promised to transform that equation entirely. But promises made in maintenance areas didn't always survive first contact with German armour. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The story of how American tank crews found themselves needing this desperate field modification began 14 months earlier, when planners at the Ordnance Department recognized a fundamental problem with American armour doctrine. The invasion of Europe would require tanks capable of assaulting fortified positions, leading armoured columns through defended urban areas, and absorbing punishment that would destroy standard Shermans within seconds. Yet no such vehicle existed in American inventory. The T-14 assault tank program had failed spectacularly. The new T-26, Pershing heavy tank, wouldn't be ready before D-Day. American armoured forces were preparing to storm Hitler's fortress Europe with medium tanks that German anti-tank guns could destroy at ranges where American return fire proved ineffective. The mathematics of armour penetration and crew survival demanded an immediate solution. In February of 1944, the Army Ground Forces submitted an urgent request: take existing M4A3 Sherman tanks and transform them into heavily armoured assault vehicles capable of surviving direct hits from German 88mm guns. The modification authorization came in March. The requirement specified 254 tanks delivered before the invasion fleet sailed for Normandy. No time for extensive testing, no opportunity for gradual production increases. The industrial capacity that had made America the arsenal of democracy would have to work a small miracle. Fisher Tank Arsenal in Grand Blanc, Michigan received the contract. Engineers examined the M4A3 chassis and calculated how much additional armour the suspension could bear without complete failure. They welded 1.5 inches of rolled homogeneous armour onto the frontal glacis plate, increasing protection from 2.5 inches to 4 inches. The side sponsons received identical treatment, bringing side armour from 1.5 inches to 3 inches. A new cast differential housing provided 5.5 inches of protection for the transmission and final drive. The turret presented greater challenges. Standard Sherman turrets couldn't provide adequate protection for the assault role. Ordnance adapted the T-23 turret design, a massive casting with 6 inches of armour on all sides. The gun mantlet received an additional 3.5 inches of welded plate, creating a combined thickness of nearly 7 inches. The resulting mantlet alone weighed more than some countries' light tanks. The heavy armor transformed the Sherman's weight from 33 tons to 42 tons. The Ford GAA engine remained unchanged, developing 500 horsepower. To compensate for the additional 9 tons, engineers increased the final drive ratio from 2.84 to 1 to 3.36 to 1. This modification reduced top speed from 25 miles per hour to 22, but provided the low-end torque necessary to move the heavily armoured beast across European terrain. The suspension system remained the standard vertical volute spring suspension found on all Shermans. Crews would be warned explicitly about the strain this imposed. Cross-country movement at high speed risked mechanical failure. The trade-off between protection and mobility had been calculated and accepted. Better to arrive slowly at an objective than to burn before reaching it. Extended end connectors, nicknamed duckbills, were fitted to the outside edges of the tracks. These widened the ground contact area, reducing ground pressure to 14 pounds per square inch, despite the increased weight. The modification helped prevent the tank from sinking into soft European soil, but added complexity to maintenance procedures that crews would have to master under combat conditions. Production began in May of 1944. The first M4A3E2 tanks rolled off Fisher's assembly lines that month. By July, all 254 had been completed, tested at Aberdeen Proving Ground, and shipped to the New York port of embarkation. The entire program, from authorization to delivery, had taken just 5 months. American industrial capacity had proven itself once again, producing a completely modified tank design faster than most nations could tool up for standard production. But the jumbos arrived too late for D-Day. The first shipments reached the port of Cherbourg in late September of 1944, 3 months after the invasion. By then, American armored units had already experienced the brutal reality of facing Panthers and Tigers with standard 75mm Shermans. The need for heavily armored assault tanks had been written in the blood of tank crews who burned alive in vehicles that couldn't withstand German anti-tank fire. The M4A3E2S were distributed carefully across multiple armored divisions. The 2nd, 3rd, and 4th armored divisions received significant allocations. Independent tank battalions supporting infantry divisions also received jumbos for use as breakthrough vehicles. Tactical doctrine called for the heavily armoured tanks to lead column movements, absorb the first enemy volleys, and provide cover for standard Shermans that followed. Tank crews selected to command jumbos understood the honour and the burden simultaneously. The thick armour meant they could survive hits that would kill their comrades in standard Shermans. But that same armour made them priority targets for every German anti-tank weapon within range. German doctrine quickly evolved to emphasize destroying the lead tank first, immobilizing American columns and forcing them to deploy under fire. The jumbo's combat debut came in October of 1944 during operations around Aachen, Germany's first major city to fall to Allied forces. The heavily fortified urban area tested American assault tactics against prepared defenses. Jumbos led attacks through rubble-strewn streets where German anti-tank guns and Panzerfaust teams waited in concealed positions. The extra armour proved its worth immediately. Shells that would have destroyed standard Shermans bounced off jumbo frontal plates or failed to penetrate the thick mantlets. One dramatic incident near Fraunhofen demonstrated both the jumbo's resilience and its limitations. A tank from the 743rd Tank Battalion took 4 direct hits from a German 88mm anti-tank gun positioned approximately 800 yards away. The first 3 rounds bounced off the glacis plate and mantlet. The 4th penetrated, through the gunner's telescope opening, a tiny weak point in otherwise impenetrable armour. The precision required for that shot indicated the level of skill German anti-tank gunners had developed through years of combat experience. Tank commanders learned to appreciate the psychological advantage the armour provided. Knowing you could withstand multiple hits changed how aggressively you manoeuvred and how boldly you engaged enemy positions. Standard Sherman crews had learned to avoid direct confrontations with German armor whenever possible. Jumbo crews could press attacks that would have been suicidal in lighter tanks, but the 75mm gun remained a critical limitation. The weapon had been chosen specifically for its superior high-explosive performance against infantry and fortifications. The M48HE shell carried more explosive filler than the 76mm version, making it devastatingly effective against bunkers, machine gun nests, and troops in the open. For the assault tank role supporting infantry attacks, this made perfect sense. The problem emerged when jumbos encountered German armor. The M62A1 armor-piercing round fired by the 75mm gun couldn't penetrate Panther frontal armor at any practical combat range. Against a Tiger, penetration was theoretically possible at very close range against specific weak points, but required tactical positioning that rarely occurred in actual combat. Jumbo crews found themselves in the absurd situation of being immune to German tank fire, while unable to return effective fire against the same targets. German tank commanders quickly recognized this weakness. When a Panther or Tiger encountered a jumbo, German doctrine called for maneuvering to expose the Sherman's thinner side armor rather than wasting ammunition on frontal shots. The tactical stalemate this created frustrated American crews who had finally received armor protection adequate for frontline combat, only to discover they couldn't exploit it against the most dangerous enemy targets. The irony wasn't lost on American tankers. They had spent months dying in under-armored Shermans that mounted guns theoretically capable of killing German tanks from favorable angles. Now they had armor that could withstand German guns, but lacked the firepower to destroy German heavy armor. The solution seemed obvious: combine the jumbo's armor with the 76mm gun already in service on later Sherman variants. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The 76mm M1 gun had been developed specifically to counter German heavy armor. Mounted in standard Shermans with T-23 turrets, it could penetrate Tiger frontal armor and Panther turret armor at combat ranges. The M62A1 APC round couldn't defeat Panther glacis plates, but penetrated the turret and side armor reliably. More importantly, the specialized M93 HVAP tungsten rounds could penetrate even Panther frontal armor at ranges approaching 1,000 yards. The problem was supply. HVAP ammunition remained desperately scarce throughout the war. By February of 1945, the average 76mm Sherman had received only 5 HVAP rounds total, an acquisition rate of 1 round per month per tank. For crews who might fire dozens of rounds in a single engagement, having 5 special penetrators meant carefully hoarding them for encounters with German heavy armor, while using standard ammunition against everything else. Still, 5 special rounds were better than none. The jumbo's 75mm gun had no special ammunition that could defeat Panther armor. The tactical disadvantage was becoming increasingly problematic as American forces pushed deeper into Germany and encountered more Panthers defending critical positions. Something had to change. The solution emerged from field-level ingenuity rather than high-level planning. Ordnance officers examining the jumbo's T-110 gun mount recognized that it was essentially a standard M62 gun mount with an additional 3.5 inches of armor plate welded to the front. The M62 mount had been specifically designed to accommodate the 76mm gun. In theory, swapping the 75 for a 76 should be relatively straightforward. The devil was in the details. The 76mm gun weighed 112 pounds more than the 75. This additional weight affected turret balance and required modifications to the recoil mechanism. More significantly, 76mm ammunition was nearly 3 inches longer than 75mm rounds. The ammunition storage racks would need complete redesign and fabrication. In February of 1945, approximately 100 jumbos were selected for conversion to 76mm armament. The guns came from 2 sources: weapons salvaged from knocked-out 76mm Shermans and new guns from standard supply stocks. The conversion program represented battlefield pragmatism at its finest. Rather than waiting for new tank designs or factory production runs, American ordnance modified existing vehicles using available components to address immediate tactical needs. The conversion process required 75 man-hours per tank. Crews removed the turret entirely and lifted it clear of the hull. The 75mm gun and its mounting hardware were unbolted and extracted. The longer 76mm barrel had to be carefully maneuvered into position without damaging the crew compartment or periscope assemblies. The ammunition storage modification proved most time-consuming. Welders cut out the original 75mm racks and fabricated new brackets to hold the longer rounds. The replacement racks were secured with custom-welded braces designed to withstand the shock of main gun firing and the vibration of cross-country movement. Improper installation risked ammunition breaking loose during combat, a potentially catastrophic failure. Some conversions included additional modifications. The famous Cobra King, the jumbo that led the relief of Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge, received not only the 76mm main gun, but also an upgraded coaxial machine gun. The standard 30 caliber Browning was replaced with a 50 caliber weapon, providing significantly more firepower against light vehicles and fortifications. The converted jumbos represented a unique combination of capabilities that existed nowhere else in American armor. 4 inches of frontal armor could withstand hits from German 88mm guns at typical combat ranges. The 76mm gun could penetrate Panther turret armor and side plates at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. With HVAP ammunition when available, even Panther glacis plates became vulnerable at medium range. German intelligence struggled to understand what they were encountering. Reports from the front described American Shermans with both heavy armor and long-barreled guns. But German recognition training focused on distinguishing between standard 75mm Shermans and the longer-barreled 76mm variants. The concept of a single tank combining heavy armor with a high-velocity gun didn't fit existing threat categories. This intelligence failure would prove costly for German tank crews, who expected heavily armored Shermans to mount short-barreled 75mm guns. The tactical surprise of taking armor-piercing fire from a tank they believed couldn't harm them disrupted German defensive tactics that had been refined over months of combat experience. The psychological impact on American crews was equally significant. Jumbo commanders, who had spent months unable to engage German heavy armor, effectively suddenly found themselves commanding the most formidable Sherman variant in European combat. The combination of survivability and lethality transformed their tactical role from defensive to offensive. They could lead attacks against known German armor positions without the paralyzing fear that had gripped standard Sherman crews facing Panthers. The first 76mm jumbos entered combat in early March of 1945 during the Allied drive to the Rhine. The tactical situation had evolved significantly since the dark days of the Battle of the Bulge. German forces were retreating across the Rhine River, fighting desperate delaying actions to buy time for defenders on the east bank. American armored spearheads were pushing through collapsing German defensive lines, seeking to capture Rhine bridges before they could be demolished. The 3rd Armoured Division advanced toward Cologne, Germany's 4th largest city and a critical industrial centre. Intelligence. Reports indicated that remnants of various German armoured units had been consolidated into ad hoc battle groups, defending the approaches. Among these were elements of Panzer Brigade 106 Feldherrnhall, equipped with an unknown number of Panther tanks, positioned to contest key crossings and urban strongpoints. Staff Sergeant Robert Early's converted jumbo moved forward with Easy Company on March 6th. The tank's new 76mm gun had been test-fired at the Ordnance Depot, but this would be its first engagement against German armour. The crew had practiced loading drills with the longer ammunition, timing themselves until they could match the rate of fire they had achieved with the 75. The muscle memory took days to establish. The loader's movements had to be recalibrated for rounds that extended 3 inches further back into the cramped turret space. The gun's performance characteristics differed noticeably from the 75. The muzzle velocity of 2,600 Feet per second meant flatter trajectory and less lead time for moving targets. The armor-piercing round could penetrate 5 inches of armor plate at 1,000 yards when striking at 90 degrees. Against sloped armor, penetration decreased according to the angle, but remained superior to anything the 75 could achieve. More importantly, the psychological burden of commanding a jumbo had transformed. For months, Early had led attacks knowing his armor could save his crew, but his gun couldn't kill German heavy tanks. Every engagement against Panthers or Tigers required complicated flanking maneuvers to expose thinner side armor, tactics that consumed time and exposed his tank to additional fire from supporting weapons. Now he could engage frontally, trusting both his armor and his gun to survive the exchange. The tactical implications extended beyond individual tank duels. German defensive doctrine relied on Panthers positioned at choke points where their superior range puppers and armor penetration created killing zones that American armor couldn't cross without catastrophic losses. Standard Shermans had to use terrain, smoke, and artillery support to close within effective range. Even 76mm Shermans with lighter armor couldn't press attacks against prepared Panther positions without accepting heavy casualties. The 76mm jumbo changed this calculation fundamentally. A tank that could withstand German fire while returning effective fire at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards could break defensive positions that had stopped previous attacks. The tactical advantage wasn't merely additive armor plus firepower, it was multiplicative. Each capability enhanced the value of the other, creating a weapons system greater than the sum of its parts. German tank crews facing these converted jumbos experienced a psychological shock similar to what American tankers had felt when first encountering Panthers in Normandy. The comfortable assumptions that had governed their tactical decision-making suddenly no longer applied. A heavily armoured Sherman that they couldn't penetrate frontally was now returning fire that could kill them at ranges they had considered safe. The shift in battlefield dynamics was profound and immediate. Near the village of Euskirchen, 30 miles southwest of Cologne, a 76mm jumbo from the 4th Armoured Division encountered 2 Panthers defending a road junction. The German tanks had positioned themselves in hull-down positions behind earthen berms, exposing only their turrets. Standard Sherman tactics called for requesting artillery support or attempting to maneuver around the position. The jumbo commander simply moved into the open and engaged. The first American round struck the lead Panther's turret at approximately 900 yards, penetrating the side armor and detonating inside the crew compartment. The second Panther immediately traversed to return fire, but the Casto's 88mm round struck the jumbo's glacis plate and ricocheted skyward without penetrating. The American gun spoke again. The second Panther erupted in flames, its ammunition cooking off in a series of secondary explosions that threw the turret several meters from the hull. The engagement lasted less than 2 minutes from first shot to final kill. 2 Panthers destroyed, 0 American casualties. The tactical equation that had terrorized American tank crews for months had been inverted. German armor no longer held overwhelming advantages in protection and firepower. The battlefield had been leveled. Word of such engagements spread rapidly through both American and German units. American tank crews who heard about 76mm jumbos requested them by name, recognizing that assignment to one of these converted vehicles significantly improved survival odds. German intelligence officers compiled reports describing American heavy tanks with thick armor and plies, powerful guns, though they lacked photographs or captured examples for detailed analysis. The German response evolved as tactical reality forced adaptation. Panther crews who had grown confident engaging standard Shermans at ranges exceeding 1,500 yards now approached every engagement cautiously. That distant Sherman might be a 76mm variant that could kill them before they achieved effective fire. The psychological advantage German armor had enjoyed since Normandy was eroding with each encounter. More significantly, German tank doctrine began emphasizing avoidance rather than engagement. When possible, Panthers withdrew from positions rather than fighting American armor, whose capabilities remained uncertain. The fuel shortages that plagued German forces in early 1945 made such withdrawals risky, often leaving tanks immobilized when they most needed mobility. But fighting from static positions against an enemy who could now penetrate your armor at combat ranges offered no better outcome. The tactical revolution represented by the 76mm Jumbo extended beyond tank versus tank combat. Urban warfare, which had characterized much of the fighting in Western Germany, favored defenders who could position anti-tank guns in buildings and rubble piles. Standard Shermans had to advance cautiously, using infantry to clear suspected positions before exposing tanks to close-range fire. The Jumbo's armor allowed more aggressive tactics. In Cologne, 76mm Jumbos led columns through rubble-strewn streets where German 88mm anti-tank guns commanded key intersections. The thick frontal armor absorbed hits that would have destroyed lighter tanks. The 76mm gun could engage and destroy anti-tank positions at ranges where the high-explosive shell remained effective. The combination allowed American forces to maintain momentum through urban areas that would have required days to clear using standard tactics. The famous M4A3E2, designated E2 from the 2nd Battalion, 32nd Armoured Regiment, was photographed leading a column of Shermans through Cologne on March 6th. The image showed the converted Jumbo at the intersection of Venloer Strasse and Spichenstrasse, its long 76mm barrel unmistakable even in photographs. Behind it, standard Shermans followed in relative safety, protected by the lead tank's ability to engage and destroy threats before they could fire on the column. The psychological burden of commanding the lead tank in such formations cannot be overstated. Every intersection might conceal an anti-tank gun. Every pile of rubble could hide a Panzerfaust team. The distinctive silhouette of a Jumbo drew fire from every German weapon within range. Crews knew that their survival depended on the armor holding under repeated impacts, and on their ability to identify and destroy threats faster than those threats could achieve killing shots. Technical Sergeant William Hughes commanded a 76mm Jumbo, supporting the 104th Infantry Division during the capture of Halle in mid-April. His after-action report documented 12 separate anti-tank gun engagements over 3 days of urban combat. His tank absorbed 27 confirmed hits from German weapons, ranging from 75mm anti-tank guns to Panzerfaust rockets. Not one penetrated the frontal armor. The tank remained operational throughout, its gun destroying 11 confirmed German positions. Such reports validated the entire concept behind the Jumbo program. The original requirement had called for an assault tank capable of leading attacks against fortified positions while surviving concentrated anti-tank fire. The addition of the 76mm gun transformed a purely defensive capability into an offensive weapon system that could both survive enemy fire and destroy enemy positions at combat ranges. But the conversion program's success came too late to affect the war's outcome significantly. By March of 1945, Germany's collapse was inevitable. The Wehrmacht had been shattered by years of attrition on multiple fronts. Fuel shortages immobilized most remaining armor. Ammunition supplies dwindled daily. Replacement crews lacked the training and experience of veterans killed in earlier campaigns. The 76mm Jumbo arrived just in time to witness the end. The approximately 100 converted Jumbos represented less than half the total M4A3E2 production run. The remaining Jumbos retained their original 75mm guns through war's end. Some crews preferred the heavier, high-explosive shell for infantry support missions. Others simply never received conversion orders before Germany surrendered. The tactical advantages of the 76mm gun were undeniable, but the logistical challenges of converting tanks in the field during active operations limited the program's scope. General George S. Patton had recognized the Jumbo's value earlier than most commanders. When official production couldn't meet demand, he quietly ordered his 3rd Army Ordnance units to create field-expedient versions by welding additional armor plates onto standard M4A3 Shermans. These expedient Jumbos used armor salvaged from knocked-out tanks, both American and German. The resulting vehicles were eclectic collections of welded plates that bore little resemblance to factory Jumbos, but provided crews with additional protection that saved lives. Some expedient jumbos received 76mm guns through similar field modifications. Third Army Ordnance officers, working with local European craftsmen hired by the military, performed conversions that would have horrified factory engineers but proved functionally effective under combat conditions. The modifications took approximately 100 man-hours per tank when performed by field workshops, longer than factory conversions, but achievable within the operational timeline. The industrial capacity that had made such field modifications possible represented a broader American advantage that transcended any single weapons system. German industry could design and produce technically superior individual tanks. The Panther was arguably the best medium tank of the war. The Tiger remained a formidable opponent that could destroy any Allied tank in a frontal engagement, but German industry couldn't produce these vehicles in quantities sufficient to affect strategic outcomes. American industry produced over 50,000 Sherman tanks during World War II. Of these, only 254 were built as M4A3E2 jumbos. Yet even this tiny fraction, less than 1% of total Sherman production, demonstrated American industry's flexibility and responsiveness to battlefield requirements. When tactical necessity demanded heavily armored assault tanks, American factories delivered them within months. When combat experience indicated those tanks needed better guns, field units performed conversions using available resources. The contrast with German tank production illuminated fundamental differences in industrial philosophy. German armor development pursued technological excellence through increasingly complex designs. The Panther incorporated sloped armor, a high-velocity gun, and advanced fire control systems that made it superior to any American medium tank in direct combat. But Panther production remained limited by resource constraints, manufacturing complexity, and Allied bombing of industrial centers. By early 1945, Germany had produced approximately 6,000 Panthers. American forces facing them could call upon thousands of Shermans, including hundreds of 76mm variants and a growing number of M26 Pershing heavy tanks. The numerical advantage overwhelmed German tactical superiority. For every Panther that destroyed multiple Shermans, American industry produced replacement tanks faster than German gunners could eliminate them. The 76mm jumbo represented American pragmatism applied to armored warfare. Rather than designing an entirely new tank to counter German heavy armor, American ordnance modified existing vehicles using components already in production. The result wasn't the best possible tank that engineering could design. It was the best possible tank that could be fielded immediately with available resources and manufacturing capacity. German prisoners interrogated after capture expressed surprise at American willingness to modify standard tanks in the field. German doctrine emphasized standardization and centralized control. Field modifications were generally forbidden except in emergency situations, and even then required approval from higher headquarters. The concept of ordnance officers independently deciding to swap guns on dozens of tanks based solely on tactical requirements struck German officers as dangerously undisciplined, but that flexibility proved decisive. American armored units could adapt to changing battlefield conditions faster than German forces could respond. When Panthers appeared in large numbers, American industry accelerated 76mm Sherman production. When 76mm guns proved inadequate against Panther frontal armor with standard ammunition, American ordnance developed and fielded HVAP tungsten rounds. When jumbos needed better anti-tank capability, field units performed conversions within weeks rather than waiting for factory production runs. The human cost of delays in fielding adequate American armor remained a painful subject throughout the war and in its aftermath. Tank crews had died in inadequate Shermans, while better weapons existed on drawing boards or in prototype form. The 76mm gun had been tested in August of 1942, but wasn't accepted for combat until July of 1944. 2 years of bureaucratic delays cost thousands of American lives. The M26 Pershing, with its 90mm gun and heavy armor, could have changed the tactical balance fundamentally if deployed in larger numbers earlier. Only 20 Pershings reached Europe in time for combat evaluation before war's end. Production accelerated after the Cologne Cathedral tank duel demonstrated the Pershing's superiority, but most didn't arrive until Germany had already surrendered. The institutional resistance to heavy tank development, led by General Leslie McNair's insistence that tank destroyers should handle enemy armor, proved catastrophically wrong. The Jumbo program itself had been a compromise born of necessity rather than sound planning. If American armor doctrine had prioritized tank versus tank combat earlier, the M4A3E2 might have been developed with the 76mm gun from the beginning. Instead, the assault tank was designed around infantry support requirements, armed with the 75mm gun optimized for high explosive performance. The field conversion to 76mm armament represented a recognition that the original concept had been incomplete. The final months of combat in Europe saw 76mm jumbos participating in operations across the collapsing Reich. The 4th Armoured Division's jumbos helped capture the city of Koblenz, breaking through German defensive lines along the Rhine. The 6th Armoured Division used converted jumbos during the drive through Bavaria toward the Austrian border. Individual tanks accumulated combat records that documented dozens of engagements and hundreds of miles of operational movement. The famous Cobra King, after its celebrated role breaking through to Bastogne, fought through the final months of the war with its 76mm gun. The tank survived multiple engagements, its thick armor absorbing hits that would have destroyed lesser vehicles. When Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, Cobra King had travelled from the Belgian border to central Germany, participating in some of the war's most intense armoured combat. Approximately 61 M4A3E2 jumbos were lost in combat, according to post-war analysis. Given that 254 were produced, this represented a loss rate of approximately 24% over 8 months of combat operations. By comparison, standard Sherman loss rates varied widely by unit and period but generally exceeded 30%. The jumbo's superior armor protection demonstrably improved crew survival rates, even when the vehicles were lost to enemy action. Crew survival statistics told an even more compelling story. When standard Shermans were knocked out, crew casualties often exceeded 75%, as penetrating hits caused catastrophic internal damage and fires. Jumbo crews often escaped even from vehicles that were mission-killed by mobility damage or gun destruction. The thick armor prevented penetration in most cases, allowing crews to evacuate through top hatches rather than burning alive inside steel coffins. These statistics validated the original requirement that had initiated the Jumbo program. An assault tank needed to protect its crew while accomplishing dangerous missions under concentrated fire. The addition of the 76mm gun enhanced offensive capability without compromising the survivability that made the design valuable. The combination proved itself repeatedly in the brutal final battles of the European War. Post-war technical analysis examined whether the M4A3E2 concept should be continued into future tank development. The suspension problems caused by excessive weight suggested that building assault tanks on medium tank chassis had inherent limitations. The M26 Pershing, designed from the beginning as a heavy tank, offered better mobility despite weighing more than the Jumbo. Its torsion bar suspension handled the weight more effectively than the Jumbo's overtaxed vertical volute springs. The armor protection analysis yielded mixed results. The Jumbo's 4 inches of frontal armor at 47 degrees provided approximately equivalent protection to the Pershing's 4 inches at 46 degrees. Both could withstand German 88mm fire at most combat ranges. The Jumbo's 6-inch turret armor actually exceeded the Pershing's in raw thickness, though the Pershing's better-designed turret shape provided comparable effective protection through sloping. The firepower comparison clearly favored the Pershing. Its 90mm gun could penetrate Panther frontal armor at ranges exceeding 1,500 yards using standard ammunition. The Jumbo's 76mm gun required HVAP rounds for frontal penetration and remained less effective even with premium ammunition. For engaging German heavy armor, the Pershing represented a more complete solution. But the Jumbo's development and deployment timeline demonstrated advantages that the Pershing program couldn't match. From authorization in March of 1944 to combat deployment in September required only 6 months. The Pershing, despite years of development, didn't reach European combat until January of 1945. When battlefield requirements demanded immediate solutions, modifying existing vehicles proved faster than developing new ones. This lesson influenced post-war American armor development significantly. The M46 pattern, M47 pattern, and M48 pattern series incorporated modular design principles that allowed rapid field modifications as threats evolved. The concept of upgrading existing vehicles, rather than always pursuing new designs, became embedded in American armor doctrine. The Jumbo's successful field conversion to 76mm armament provided a template for future upgrade programs. The 76mm Jumbo also demonstrated the importance of balanced design in armored vehicles. Protection without adequate firepower created frustration and tactical limitations, as original Jumbo crews discovered when facing Panthers they couldn't penetrate. Firepower without adequate protection led to unsustainable casualties, as standard Sherman crews learned throughout the European campaign. The converted Jumbo achieved a balance that made it one of the most effective American tanks of the war's final months. German tankers who encountered 76mm Jumbos in combat developed a grudging respect for the vehicle's capabilities. Post-war interrogations revealed that German crews considered the heavily armoured, long-barreled Sherman to be a more dangerous opponent than standard 76mm variants. The psychological impact of knowing that your first shot might not penetrate enemy armour while their first shot could kill you changed how German crews approached engagements. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.